My name is Marisa McClellan, and I write a blog called Food in Jars. And my first book was called Food in Jars, and came out about 2 years ago. And then this new book has been out for just about 3 months now, and is called Preserving by the Pint. And what I really like about this book, I mean, granted, I like it, I wrote it, is that every recipe in it starts with either a pint, a quart, or a pound or two of produce, which makes it really great for people who live in urban areas. I live in Philadelphia, in Center City, Philadelphia, on the 20th floor of a high-rise. And so this book was born out of my need to continue to can while not filling my apartment from floor to ceiling with jars. Although doing what I do, it's pretty much wall-to-wall jar as it is. I have a very tolerant husband when it comes to mason jars. He has a lot of Legos, so we balance out. You know, what's nice about this book is that so often when you read canning recipes, it'll say you need a flat or 5 pounds or, you know, a very large quantity of produce just to get started. Whereas what I did with this book is that I started picking up the quantities that you get at farmers markets or in a CSA share or at a farmer's or at like the grocery store, or what you're getting out of a small backyard garden or a community garden, and tried to build recipes around those units of measure, so that instead of needing that flat or that 5 pounds, you could start with just a quart of pickling cucumbers or a quart of yellow plums, which I'm going to make the yellow plum and vanilla jam out of the book today. So these aren't really true yellow plums, but they're close enough, so we're going to call them yellow plums. I wrote the recipe originally with shiro plums, which are these really light, almost translucent plums, which are really delicious, but just about any plum will work in this recipe. So let me ask first off, who are my canners? Who has canned before? Anybody? Okay, a few folks. Who has never canned before? Who is terrified? Okay, I have a terrified hand here. So often when I do these talks, these classes, a lot of people come who really are interested in canning, but they're sort of afraid they're going to make a batch of jam or do a couple jars of pickles and share them with their friends and family, and 2 weeks later they're not going to have any friends and family left. Right? That's the fear, that you're going to kill everyone with your canning, because, you know, this is the United States. We are very food safety anxious. And so, and it is true that botulism, which is the thing everyone's scared of, is problematic. You know, you don't want to get botulism. The good news is that it's really hard to grow botulism in canning jars, in your home preserved foods. And in fact, it is impossible for most of the things that we make at home, because when it comes to dealing with botulism, trying to avoid its development in your jars, botulism cannot grow in high acid environments. And just about everything that we can at home is a high acid preserve. And when I talk about high acid, you use pH to determine whether it's high acid or low acid. So if something has a pH of 4.6 or below, that is a high acid preserve. And you know that it's a high acid preserve also because if the recipe is telling you to can it in a boiling water bath, you can only can things in boiling water bath canners that are high in acid already. So your jams and your pickles and your chutneys and your jellies and your tomato products, although I'm going to put like a mental asterisk next to tomatoes because we're going to come back to those in a second. But all of these high acid preserves that can be canned in a boiling water bath, it is impossible for botulism to grow in those environments. Because botulism, when we talk about botulism, we're talking about the botulism spores. So the botulism toxin is killed at the boiling point, but those spores are very hardy, and they take temperatures of around 235 to 240 degrees Fahrenheit to be killed. And, you know, at sea level on our planet, in this atmosphere, we are never going to be able to boil water beyond 212 degrees. And then the higher up in elevation you go, the lower your boiling point goes. And so when you can something and you need to kill off botulism spores, or you need to inhibit their growth, you either need to make the environment highly acidic so they can't develop, or you need to elevate the temperature in order to kill them off. So if you're working with these high acid preserves, you don't have to elevate the temperature because the acidic environment prevents their germination into the toxin. But if you do low acid foods, then you can get into the whole pressure canning world. I always tell people it's better to sort of run before you, or walk before you can run. So you want to start getting really comfortable with canning, do the boiling water bath, feel happy and at ease moving jars of food in and out of pots of boiling water. And then once you feel really comfortable with that, you can go proceed, get yourself a pressure canner and start doing cool things like homemade, you know, like flavored beans or chicken stock or vegetable stock and stuff like that. But for now, I like to start everybody off with the boiling water bath process. How's everybody feel about that? Feeling good? Got the science? We got, you didn't know there was going to be so much science when you came to a cooking demonstration, right? But I like to get everybody on the same page, make sure that everyone feels comfortable with the safety part, and then go from there. So any safety questions after that? Everybody's good? Everybody's happy to be here? Yeah.
Okay, so if you're making something with tomatoes, you have naturals. Does that mean
Yes.
you cannot get botulism with tomatoes, or you can?
So most fruit already naturally has a pH below 4.6. Like these plums, the pH range for plums is typically like 3.0 to 3.7 or 8. Tomatoes, we think of tomatoes as being very high acid, but actually because we as Americans have a sweet tooth, over the last 50 years, tomato growers have responded to that by breeding tomatoes that are lower in acid than they used to be. So what we've done is made a very sweet tomato that's no longer safe for canning in a boiling water bath canner unless you do what's called acidifying the environment. So anytime you can tomatoes, you either add bottled lemon juice or citric acid to the preserve to ensure that the acid levels in the jar are high enough, that the pH is low enough in order to prevent any possible botulism germination from occurring. So, and you either use citric acid or bottled lemon juice because they both have a consistent acidity. You can't use fresh lemon juice because the acidic levels of lemon juice varies greatly on a fresh lemon, but so bottled products, there's a requirement that they all have a consistent acidity across every bottle. So you know that you're getting the same thing with every bottle of bottled lemon juice. There are also a few other fruits that you acidify like that. Figs, white peaches and white nectarines, Asian pears, and then melons and mangoes. So sort of more of the tropical fruits and things where they just don't taste as acidic to you. If it doesn't taste as acidic as, like a white peach doesn't taste nearly as acidic as a yellow peach, that's your indication that, this might not have as much acid. Maybe I need to boost it a little to make it safe. Everybody good? Okay, cool. So I have chopped up about 2 pounds of plums right here, and I'm going to measure in approximately about 1.25 cups of sugar. I'm using sort of fancy organic evaporated cane juice. It doesn't really matter. You can use plain old granulated sugar. You can use whatever you have. I brought this because I wasn't going to tear the bag while I traveled here from Philadelphia today. So, it's all about practicality. I didn't bring a measuring cup. That was one thing I forgot, but I'm going to eyeball it, and it's going to be about right because this is 1.5 pounds, and so I want to use about a little more than a third of the bag. I didn't peel them. You never need to peel plums because if you peel a plum, they're unbalanced because they're sweet on the inside and tart on the outside. So if you peel them, you lose the tart balance. And so I didn't peel them. In fact, that's why one of these recipes are so handy, is that you don't have to peel them. You can just chop them and mix them with the sugar. So I've got my sugar in here, and we're actually going to let it sit for just a couple minutes before I apply the heat. You never want to apply heat to undissolved sugar unless you're trying to make caramel. And caramel is delicious, and I highly encourage you to make it, but I don't want to caramelize the sugar in here because once you start caramelizing sugar, it's very easy to start burning it, and I don't want this to get burnt. So I'm just going to let the fruit sit with the sugar for a minute or two, and the sugar will start to pull out the moisture from the fruit, and then that moisture will start to dissolve the sugar. So it'll be this nice syrupy fruit cocktail before I apply the heat. One fun tip, and I'm also going to add the juice of half a lemon here, just to help things start to dissolve a little bit more and to add more balance to the fruit and the sugar. So one nifty thing you can do at this point is, for instance, you go to the farmer's market, you come home, you've bought a quart of plums, and they're a little bit riper than you thought they were, or in the travel from farmer's market to home, they got a little bit beat up, and you're like, I don't know if these are going to last me, throughout the week. So what you can do is actually chop them up right at that point, mix them with the sugar, and put them in a container and put them in the refrigerator and just let them sit for a day or two until you have time to come back and make the jam. It's a really good way to break up the work of canning, particularly if you have busy lives, which I'm just going to guess that all of you do. And so you can chop up the fruit one day and combine it with the sugar, let it sit for 2 or 3 days, up to 2 or 3 days in the refrigerator, and then come back to it the next, when you're ready to can it up, make the jam and can it up. And so it's a good way to sort of say, okay, I'm going to touch it this day and I'm going to touch it that day, but I don't have to dedicate, a lot of time to this. Although you're going to see this doesn't take that long. It took me all of 10 minutes to cut up the fruit. And then once we apply the heat to this, this jam is going to cook in about 12 to 15 minutes, maybe a little longer. I often demo on induction burners, which are amazing because they offer such direct heat and they cook really fast. So it's a very handy fuel source. Any questions about all this so far? Yeah?
Is it advantageous to leave it in the refrigerator for longer?
What it simply does is that it helps pull out all the syrup. So you're sort of at that syrupy, ready to cook time faster. So you might shave 2 or 3 minutes off the cooking time if you let it macerate for, you know, a day or two. Or, I mean, even an hour, you'll get that syrupy effect. Anybody else? All right, cool. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Is it possible to use less sugar if you want it less sweet, or do you need that amount?
I was actually just about to talk about that, so that's a perfect question. So when it comes to canning, making a preserve like this, and this jam is only going to have 4 ingredients. It's plums, sugar, lemon juice, and a vanilla bean, which I'll get in there in just a second. So sugar doesn't just sweeten. It's not just playing a sweetening role. It's also playing a role in creating the consistency of the jam, and it's also a preservative. So when you reduce the sugar in a preserve, and this is actually considered a fairly low sugar jam recipe in the context of the traditional canning canon. Often the recipes that our grandmothers made would be 1 part fruit to 1 part sugar, because they were really just trying to preserve the fruit as best they knew how, and they knew that to be you need a lot of sugar. And so over the years we found that you can get a nice set with less sugar, but at a certain point when you pull out too much sugar, it becomes very hard to get it to thicken unless you use a low or no sugar pectin. And there are some really good ones out there. One that I particularly like is called Pomona's pectin, and what's cool about it is so what's going to happen is as we cook this jam, the water is going to evaporate out of the fruit, and the sugars are going to concentrate, both the sugar I added as well as the sugars that are natural to the fruit. And so as they concentrate, sugar has this really nifty ability to change physical consistency as you heat it. So as you heat the sugar up, and the water evaporates out of the pan, you're going to enable the sugars to elevate beyond the boiling point. And so what we're going to try to do is cook them to around 220 degrees. And at that point, those sugars will start to thicken. And it's actually known as the gel phase for sugar, for heating sugar. And so as that sugar thickens, it's going to bond with the pectin that's natural to the fruit. And so it reaches that 220 mark. And because I'm making a small batch, you'll notice I didn't add any pectin to this. You know, and some people think, well, you can't make jam without additional pectin. But pectin is actually the fiber that holds up the cell walls of fruits and vegetables. I'm going to turn this on so that I don't lose too much time just talking without cooking. So pectin is the fiber that holds up the cell walls of fruits and vegetables. It exists in all fruits and vegetables, and some things have more of it than others. So you can always tell whether something has a lot of pectin or a little bit of pectin by its physical consistency, because if it's got more pectin, it's sturdier. So like a lemon, you know, you can throw a lemon across the room and it still looks like a lemon when it lands. It's very sturdy. Whereas, like, this is a fairly not super ripe plum. I could probably chuck this and it would still land and look like a plum. But if I had a really ripe peach or something and I lobbed it across the room, peach puree all over, you know, the greens over there. So it's just a good way to tell, does something have a lot of pectin or a little bit of pectin by its sort of ability to withstand force. Another good example is strawberries versus blueberries. You know, you drop a strawberry, it is strawberry splatter. You drop a blueberry and it bounces. So it's ways that you can tell whether something has a lot of pectin or a little bit of pectin by how it withstands. I like to think of it like the lunch bag test. You drop an apple in your lunch bag, you walk around for 4 hours. That apple is still going to be edible and look like an apple when you go back to eat it. You do that with a pear, and it's pear pudding. So again, you can see how something has more pectin or less pectin dependent on its physical consistency. So for this preserve, plums have a fair amount of pectin. And so what we're doing with this small batch is that we're going to elevate, and you notice I'm doing it in a frying pan. This is not just that this was the only pan available. In fact, they had to go hunt for this pan. I was like, I need a stainless steel pan, please. And so they went and hunted for this. So this pan's inaugural use here at Google. I feel very honored to be taking it for its maiden voyage. I like a frying pan or a skillet for preserves like this because it produces, you get a lot of surface area and very little depth, and you don't have high walls on the pan preventing the steam from escaping. So what's going to happen is that this is going to cook up to a boil really quickly. We're going to get to that 220 point relatively fast, and then
we won't have cooked all the sort of starch, all of the structure out of the pectin by the time the sugars get to 220 degrees, and so they'll bond. And so this is how you can get a really nice consistency for your jam without any additional pectin, because we're making a small batch. Now, if you wanted to do this with even less sugar, you would use a low or no sugar pectin like Pomona's pectin. And Pomona's pectin is cool. It's called a low methoxy pectin. That's kind of its, a category. And so instead of needing the sugar to bond with the pectin in order to create a set, when you buy a box of Pomona's pectin, it comes with 2 packets in it. One is a little packet that has calcium powder in it, and the other one has pectin powder in it that is made from dehydrated lemon and lime peels that have been dehydrated, ground, and sifted. So it's essentially just a very, very fine powder of lemon and lime essence. And with that pectin, what you do is you make a solution with the calcium powder, and then you add that solution to your cooking fruit without any sugar. And then once the fruit has softened, you add the pectin powder that has been stirred into your sweetener, whether you're using some honey or maple syrup or sugar or coconut sugar or whatever you're using. And when the pectin hits the calcium sort of spiked fruit, the pectin and the calcium bond and create a set. So it's not ever going to be quite as sort of luxurious and soft and sort of you know how when you get sort of like a good handmade regularly sugared jam, it has a little bit of movement and body and is kind of spoonable. When you use Pomona's pectin, it likes to set up a little bit more firmly, and so you get something that's more like an all-fruit spread that you can buy at the grocery store. But it's a really good way to create a preserve that is spreadable and still delicious with less sugar. The one thing to know about Pomona's pectin is simply, oops, I just lost nobody saw that, is that when you take out a lot of sugar, you have to compensate for the flavor someplace else. So when I make really low or no sugar preserves, I like to add a lot of lemon or a lot of lime or a lot of orange, something that's very acidic, so that you are balancing out the lack of sweetness with some other bright flavor. So it's just something that's good to know if you want to explore those low and no sugar preserves, that you need to compensate with lots of spice and lots of acid to create something that's still going to be balanced and have a lot of flavor. All right, how's everybody doing? Good? Any questions? Doesn't just have to be about this. Any food preservation questions, I'm here for you. Yes?
What's the difference between jam, jelly, and preserve?
Okay, that's a really good question. A jelly is a preserve made with just fruit juice, or sometimes not even fruit juice. It can be, like I've known people who make beer jellies, but it's essentially a liquid that has had either added sugar or added sweetener, and often pectin, to make it sort of a solid, clear, spreadable preserve. And so preserve is sort of just the all-purpose word, and then also preserve is often used to refer to sort of bigger pieces of fruit in syrup that isn't quite as set as jam. Jam is a whole fruit preserve that can either have additional pectin or not, but is sort of fruit and syrup all together. So the preserve is sort of this all-purpose term. And then you've got a fruit butter, which is a fruit puree that has been cooked down slowly and over low heat over time, so that you concentrate the fiber in the fruit, you cook out the water, you concentrate the sweetness. I'm sure everybody's had apple butter in the past. You can do that with any fruit. So I've done blueberry butters and strawberry butters, sweet cherry butter is awfully good. And so you can do that with a lot of different fruits. Jelly, jam, preserve, butter, curd. Fruit curds are a fruit juice preserve that's set up with egg yolk and then has butter added to it. So it's a very rich, spreadable. I'm just kind of finding all the different terms for you now. Compote. That's a good one. So compote is a less sweetened, typically in a thin syrup, fruit that's been cooked down. Not going to have as much sugar or honey or whatever. It's going to be, and often they're made quickly. So often compotes are just like, oh, I have this peach and this plum and these few cherries that need to be used up. Let me just cook them down and then we'll put them over oatmeal. It's kind of compote's driving force. A conserve is a jam that has either citrus peel or nuts or dried fruit added to it. Oh, a chutney. Chutneys are sort of like a jam, only it's a sweet and savory preserve. So it's like fruit and sugar and vinegar and spices and onions or garlic, things like that. And so it's really got that, both the sweet and the savory element in one jar. Just a note, if you ever make chutneys and you open the jar and you find that it's really overpoweringly vinegary, I find that chutney has a lot in common with wine. in terms of its need to breathe after you've opened the jar, because you made the chutney, you slapped the lid on it, you processed it, and then it sort of has been just hanging out, and it needs a little bit of time to release some of that vinegar. I just realized I need to get my vanilla bean in here as things simmer away. Fresh vanilla beans are a really great way to add a lot of flavor to jams. They can be really expensive if you just buy them by the 1 or the 2 at the grocery store. I tend to buy them in bulk. I am a little obsessive about this sort of thing, but anybody can buy them in bulk. You don't have to just be a preserver to do it. And you can, a pound of grade B vanilla beans are about $55. So when you buy them at the grocery store, you'll pay, $10 or $20 for 2 beans, and if you buy them in bulk, you'll get, and you spend $55, you'll get 150 to 180 beans. And so if you're interested in adding vanilla bean to your pantry, it's always fun to go in with a friend and buy like a half pound or a pound and split them up. And then you can do cool stuff like make your own vanilla extract or vanilla finishing salts or flavored sugars and stuff like that. So it's a fun little pantry addition if you find yourself loving the flavor of fresh vanilla bean in your preserves. And all I did was I split the bean down the center, I exposed I exposed the interior, and then I just used the flat of my knife to scrape those seeds out. And then I added the seeds to the pan, and now I'm also going to drop the pod into the pan in order to extract as much flavor from it as possible. I always tell people to add the seeds to the pan, because I had a friend email me one day and say, I made your preserve, I made your pear vanilla jam, and you didn't tell me what to do once I scraped the vanilla bean. So I threw away the scrapings, and I just popped the pod into the pan, and it broke my heart because the seeds are where all the goodness is. Like, you get some flavor from the pod too. So, but I just like to make sure everybody knows. You're gonna scrape those seeds out, and you're gonna add them to the pan. So let's take a look at how this is looking. One of my favorite ways to tell whether jam is finished is by looking at the droplets on a spatula to see, is it thickening up? Because what this does is, as it thickens, it's going to change consistency as it cools down. So when you run your spatula through and then hold up the droplets, it's going to cool down rapidly this little sample that you've taken out of the pan. And so you can look and see, do I have thick droplets? Do they look thick? Do they have a wide base that are hanging on the spatula as I wiggle it? This one's it's not there yet, but it's nice to set a baseline and look at the droplets over the time that it's cooking to see how it's setting up. Another way, and you can't really see this, but I'm going to explain it to you, is that one of the nice things about making this in a skillet is that you can tell that it's thickening up as you stir, because when you pull a line through, as it gets closer to being done, that space will stay open. And so you can very easily tell. It's almost, you'll be able to kind of sculpt it in the pan. And so as it continues to cook, you'll be able to see it kind of thicken up in the pan. All right.
How long does the vanilla bean stay for in the cabinet?
How long in the cabinet? I am working through a batch that I bought almost 2 years ago. And what I do is I triple wrap them in plastic, so I have them like 3 Ziploc bags inside of each other, and then I just keep them in a cool, like in the corner of a kitchen cabinet. They don't need to be in the refrigerator or the freezer, and they really last a while. And if they do harden up, you can just put them in some warm water for a minute or 2 before you use them, and it's enough to sort of replump it, and then you can get good flavor out of it. Yeah, they give a lot. And the nice thing too is that once this jam is finished cooking, we can actually take that vanilla bean out, rinse it off, dry it off, and then you could, let it sit on let it cool or dry on your counter for a day or so, and then put it in a jar of sugar, and it'll still be able to flavor that sugar. Or, drop it if you're making some homemade vanilla extract. You can drop that pod that has been cooked and scraped, and it'll still add flavor to the vanilla extract. So that you can get a lot out of them. Can you guys smell this? Are you getting the smell of this? Shoot. It smells really good right here, let me just tell you. All right, so did someone have a question? All right, so another way that you can tell that jam is getting near to its done point is that as you stir, it's going to sizzle a little bit more frantically as you stir it. And so I always try to say to people that it's going to tell you both visually, it's going to tell you as the smell, the aroma gets stronger, that it's almost done, and it's going to get glossier, and you're going to hear it. You're going to hear that sizzle. So it's talking to you. The pan is talking to you. So just as long as you know the language, you're going to be able to know that your jam is done. So I'm going to be quiet for a second now and stir and see if you guys can hear the sizzle. Did you hear that? So that's an indication that the temperature is hotter, that the jam physically is hotter than 212 degrees now. And I am cooking it high. The name of the game is evaporation, right? So you want to have your temperature up as high, cook as hot and fast as you possibly can without burning yourself and without burning the jam. I don't want you to hurt yourself when you make this, so if you need to sacrifice and have a couple minutes longer cooking time to prevent yourself from getting a second-degree burn from splashing jam on your arm, please turn the temperature down. But, you know, do try to keep it up as high as you can manage and control without doing harm to yourself. So let's talk a little bit about the canning process now, because that's really what we're here for, right? You don't want to just hear about jam, you want to hear about canning. So this is my canning pot for today, and this is my teeny tiny small batch canning pot. I use it at home a lot. It's really handy. It's not designed for canning, but it works really well for canning. This pot's called the 4th burner pot, and what I really like about it is that it's tall and narrow, so you can stack a couple jars inside of it. And here, I'll show you what I have in here right now. I just have 2 of these little wide mouth half pints stacked one on top of each other. And this batch is going to make probably enough to fill these jars with a little bit left over so that we can taste when we're all done. Although I didn't bring anything to taste on. We'll cross that bridge when we get, there's snacks everywhere. I'm sure we can find a cracker. So what I like about this pot, the reason it's such a good pot is for canning, is that it comes fitted with this little rack. Anytime you can, you want to make sure that any pot can be a canning pot, you just need to make sure that it has a rack in it to ensure that the jars are elevated off the bottom of the pot so that the water can circulate and so that they don't rattle and break on the bottom of the pot. Because you know how when water boils, the little bubbles originate from the bottom of the pan and they move upwards with increasing force. And so when they bubble and boil up, they can actually rattle those jars enough to break them. And so you just want to have something at the bottom of the pot. When you're doing larger batches, you just, a silicone trivet will work. This is my favorite sort of modified canning rack, modified in the sense that I drop it in the bottom of a pot and call it a canning rack, and it's a silicone trivet. It's called the Blossom trivet. They sell it on Amazon. If you go looking for one, click through all the colors before you buy it, because they vary in price, $3 or $4, depending on what color you get. So the algorithm, who knows? But so you know, depending on whether you want black or pink or orange, you might pay $3 or $4 more or less. But orange was the cheapest the last time I bought it, so that's why I have an orange one. So, oops, we're getting a little sticking here. All right, I'm going to stir and pay attention to this for just a moment. All right, let's look at our droplets one more time, and then I'll talk about the canning process. So do you see how much thicker they've gotten in just a couple minutes of cooking? That sugar is concentrating, the water is cooking out, we're getting a lot of steam happening here, and I would say in just another 2 or 3 minutes this is going to be done, which is great. See, it doesn't take all day to make jam. It's very nice. We'll talk a little bit about pickles too, because pickles are another one where people are selling us sort of, you know, you buy a $12 jar of pickles or $15 or $20 jar of pickles. It costs them $2 to make those pickles. You can do that at home. Very easy, very delicious. There's nothing better than a homemade pickle. But so, let's talk about the canning process. Let me turn this down a little bit. So any pot can be a canning pot as long as it's tall enough to hold a rack at the bottom, have the jars fully submerged in water, have a little bit of water covering them up at the top, and then have some room at the top of the pot to boil. So stainless steel stock pot, it can be a great canning pot. If you have a pasta pot with an insert, that's a really good canning pot. This 4th burner pot, an asparagus pot, which is sort of a less fancy 4th burner pot. Whatever you have, you can make it work as long as the pot is tall enough to fully submerge the jar. What happens when we take so I've heated up the jars. I brought this pot to a boil before I cooked the jam, and then they've just been hanging out sitting here. They don't have to be sterilized before we put the jam in the jars, because we're going to boil the jars once they're full for 10 minutes. And if you boil something for 10 minutes or longer, that is your sterilization step. So you don't have to worry that everything has to be perfectly, meticulously immaculate. All we need is for it to be clean and hot. Then we put the finished jam in it, and we're going to wipe the rims, put the lids and rings on the jars, and put them back in the water. One thing is that when we put the jam in the jars, we always want to make sure to leave some headspace. And headspace is simply the amount of space you leave from the top of the product, so how much it's filled up, to the top of the jar. And you typically want about, let me get it turned to the right place, you want about 1/2 inch. And the reason for that is that that 1/2 inch of headspace, that oxygen that you trap in the jar, is going to create the seal. Because when you fill up these jars, you're going to fill them up so that the product is somewhere in between where the overlapping thread or the continuous thread overlaps. So every mason jar has a continuous thread, and then there's a point where it overlaps. You just want your product to be somewhere in between the top and the bottom thread. You've trapped that oxygen in there, and when you put the rings on, you tighten them enough so that they meet resistance. They're fully on there, but you don't tighten them so much that the oxygen can't escape. Because when we put the jars, the full jars, back in the water, and we apply heat to it, that oxygen that we've trapped in that headspace is going to start to vent as we boil the jars, because the heat makes the oxygen sort of agitate and move around, exit the jars. And so throughout the boiling process, you guys are all sciencey people, and I'm probably explaining this terribly for sciencey people, but it's basically, they're venting. The jars are venting throughout the boiling process, so that when we take them out, everything that had been expanding during the boiling process starts to contract. And as it contracts, you form a vacuum. And as that vacuum forms, because there's nothing there to hold that space anymore, because we vented all the oxygen out that was there before, that lid pulls down, and it pulls down in a way where you create a natural vacuum that is then backed up by the sealing compound on the lid. And so these lids are in the water because I want to soften this rubber ring, this sealing compound, so that it'll soften continually throughout the boiling process. And then when we take those jars out and that vacuum starts to pull, it's going to pull this lid in tighter and tighter contact with the rim of that jar. And then as the jars are cooling, the sealing compound hardens. So it's sort of a double seal. You've got a natural vacuum backed up by this hardening sealing compound. I always like to say that it's like when you were a kid and you put a cup on your face over your mouth, and you sucked in and sucked in and sucked in until the cup stuck to your face. That's basically what's happening in the jar. And then it's as if someone put like super glue on the cup without you knowing it, and you sucked it in and it stuck to your face. Not that anyone would do that. It's sort of a ridiculous analogy, I know. But that's kind of, if you want to think about sort of a real life scenario of how the vacuum is forming and what's backing it up, that's kind of what's happening there. So let's look at our jam. I'm going to turn this all the way. Did I kill I think I killed the heat. So it's almost there. I'm just going to bring it back up to an active boil for just a second more. It's still got this little, once it sits in the pan, it spreads a little bit more than I like it to, and it's got little bits of water around the edges. So I just want to cook that last bit of water out and make sure that it's going to be nice and thick.
You never use frozen fruits, right?
You can use frozen fruits. When you freeze fruit, you take those cells, every little cell in the fruit, and when you freeze it, the water inside those cells expands, and it bursts all the cell walls. And so then when it defrosts, it releases its liquid, and it's not going to have as much pectin content because you've sort of you've broken down that pectin in the cell walls a little bit. So you're going to have to work a little bit harder to get frozen fruit to come to a set point, because if I'm making jam with frozen fruit, I always make sure to use some pectin, because you're going to need a little pectin boost because you've sort of stressed the natural pectin in the fruit. But you certainly can do it. Oh, this is called the lid wand. It's a plastic stick with a magnet on the end, and it's the best tool ever, because you can move your lids in and out of the water without burning yourself. When it comes to canning, there are really 3 tools that I recommend as sort of must-haves. This is pretty handy, and it costs like $3. So,
For all colors?
Yes. Yeah. These days I see it mostly in fluorescent green, but if you look hard, you can still get the blue ones. So you want a lid lifter, a jar lifter, and then a wide mouth funnel. And those are really your 3 pieces of equipment that you really want to have. You want a canning rack, but you don't have to even have this guy. If you have a round cake cooling rack, like a stainless steel cake cooling rack, that can be your canning rack. You can even drop a kitchen towel in the bottom of your pot and call that your canning rack, because it's essentially patting the jars at the bottom and allowing some of the heat to circulate. All right, so we hear all that sizzling. That says to me that this jam is done. There's not as much water coming out at the edges. And the bits of fruit, there's not as much distinct fruit pieces, which is what you want to see. I like a fairly chunky jam. I don't want it to be perfectly smooth, but you want the sort of fruit to have broken down. And look at how thick it is now that it's on the spatula. That's what you want to see. All right, we're going to call this guy done. One little tip is to always stir your jam for a minute or 2 after that you've turned off the heat. Not a minute, 15 seconds, 30 seconds. basically what this does is it helps let that last steam escape, and it tightens it up just a bit more. And you're just going to get a slightly better texture. You can also tell that it's done. Here, I'm going to tilt this a little bit. Can you see how nice and thick, and when I pull the spatula through, that space stays open? That's what you're looking for. So the reason I use a stainless steel pan today, and I asked them to find me one as opposed to aluminum, is when you're making jam, you really want to use a non-reactive metal. You either want enameled cast iron or stainless steel or anodized aluminum, because if you use a bare aluminum pan or a bare cast iron pan, you can leach a metallic flavor into your finished preserve. So aluminum and cast iron are reactive metals, and so they react with acids, and they release a little bit of themselves into the whatever you're cooking in that pan, which is great sometimes if you're someone who's iron deficient and wants to get a little extra iron into your diet. You can use a cast iron pan. But if you, with preserves, you end up leaching a metallic flavor that doesn't ever go away. And about once a summer, I hear from someone who writes that they have made, 15 pints of salsa in a giant aluminum pot. They cooked it for a couple of hours, and now it tastes like they're licking aluminum foil, and they ask me what they can do. And unfortunately, there's nothing you can do in that scenario. You either have to get used to the taste of tin, or you have to throw the salsa away. And it's really heartbreaking for people who've spent a day and a half making a batch of salsa to hear that it cannot be eaten. So you really want to look for stainless steel or enamel cast iron or anodized aluminum. I tend to stay away from non-stick when I'm making preserves, simply because I'm cooking at fairly high temperature, and stainless or non-stick doesn't do well at high temperatures. It starts to break down. It's just not good for the pan. So if you want to sort of maintain the quality of your non-stick, cooking it over high heat for 10 or 15 minutes isn't going to be the best way to do it. So I recommend, something where, you can cook the heck out of it and nothing's going to happen. All right, so we're going to pour the jam into the jars with our wide mouth funnel. Sometimes I do this blind, looking over the top of the pan, and I'm not going to do that today because we're recording this and no one needs to see me pour jam all over the countertop here. So nice color, right? It's kind of a little bit peachy. You can see how pretty this would be if you had like a pure yellow plum too, because it would be like translucently yellow and perfect. But I like it like this too. All right, so our jars are filled. I just like to give them a little wiggle. They could both probably use like one more tablespoon of jam, but I want to leave us enough to eat, so I'm not going to top them off quite as much as I might if I was doing this at home. And then I'm going to grab my lids. Actually, that's a lie. I'm going to grab a paper towel, and I'm going to wipe the rims just to make sure that there's nothing on there that could prevent a good seal from forming. All right, so lid one, and you always want to place the lids independent of the rings, just so that you know that you're getting the sealing compound in direct contact with the whole of the rim of the jar. If you place them with the rings, if you have them all attached, you're just not getting that perfect placement. So, and I didn't sterilize these. I didn't even heat them up. It's really hard to screw a ring on if it's piping hot. And there's really no reason, because they're going to be in the pot with the jars for the 10 minutes. So it'll be fine. So again, you just turn it till it meets resistance. You don't have to go like that with it. You just want to turn it so that the oxygen can escape and that you can get a good seal. And I promise, the oxygen will leave, the water won't go in. You can trust me. It's just not going to happen, because the force of the oxygen is going to be sort of constantly venting throughout, so it prevents any water from leaching in. And I'm stacking these. You can stack your jars. That sort of blows the mind of some people when they can on occasion. They're like, what, you can stack the jars? You can stack the jars, no big deal. All right, so we're going to just bring this up to a boil, boil it for 10 minutes, and at 10 minutes, so I don't set the timer until it hits a full rolling boil. Once it's at a full rolling boil, that's the point at which we set the timer. I'm also just going to make a little public service announcement right now. And no shame if you've done this, but this is the end of the jar lifter that you put on the jars, and this is the handle. I've often seen people use them upside down, and you don't get nearly as secure grip if you're trying to grip on the jar with the handle portion. Do you guys know the website Food 52? Anybody? I'm seeing a few nods. They have a picture on their website, or at least they did last summer. They were selling mason jar, like canning tools, and they were using in the picture the jar lifter the wrong way. And so, what can you do? But for you at home, when you go home and can, make sure you do it so that you're going to get the best, most secure grip, because otherwise you're going to feel really insecure as you lift piping hot jars in and out of boiling water. And no one needs that extra stress in their lives. So, yeah, Any questions? Yes?
I noticed you didn't try to get out the air bubbles. Is that not really an issue for jam?
It's really not an issue for jam. Anytime you make jam, it's just kind of going to flow into the jars. And, if it's a really thick jam, I might run a chopstick around the inside of the jar. But most of the time, I only try to I'm active about getting the air bubbles out if I'm making like pickles or something that's really thick. So let's talk about pickles a little bit, shall we? So basic pickles. The basic ratio for pickles, anytime you want to pickle anything, it is 1 part vinegar, 1 part water, and 1 tablespoon of a finely milled salt per cup of vinegar you're using. And that can be your pickle brine for everything. And then with that ratio, you can pickle green beans, cucumbers, okra, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. What else do you want to pickle? Turnips. You could do a thinly sliced turnip, a thinly sliced radish. Watermelon rind is going to be a little different because you add sugar to it, but it's basically the same. You're going to use a little less water and a little bit more sugar because you want to create more of a syrup and you want it to be really flavorful. But yeah, watermelon rind is a delicious pickle. I'm writing a new book right now too. This just came out, but I'm writing a new book about naturally sweetened preserves too. So I'm doing a honey sweetened watermelon rind pickle in that book, which so far it is amazingly good. So it's a fun pickle. Yeah, so basically you take that same standard ratio, you put your spices at the bottom of the jar. So for like a garlic dill pickle, a couple of garlic cloves, a teaspoon or 2 of dill seed. You want to use dill seed and not dill weed because the dill seed is going to hold up better over time. Dill weed sort of breaks down and it makes your pickling brine kind of murky. And one of the ways where we tell whether something's gone wrong with a preserve is how it looks. And so if your brine changes sort of if it goes opaque and changes a little bit of color, that's an indication that something might be going wrong with the jar. Often, if you've used dill seed, it's just that the dill seed is sort of dissolving into the vinegar, but it gives you sort of that peace of mind knowing that you're not having something that's going wrong. So put your spices at the bottom of the jars, pack those vegetables in pretty tightly, and then pour the brine on top. I like to I don't have a jar anymore, but when I have a full pickle jar, I just tap it on the counter first to help release any trapped air bubbles, and then you go around with either a wooden or plastic chopstick or a really kind of long, narrow silicone or rubber spatula and help release the air bubbles. The reason you want to release those air bubbles is that if you trap air bubbles inside of a canning jar, the same thing is going to happen to those air bubbles that are trapped throughout the product that happen to the air that you leave in the headspace of the jar, right? So as you heat the jars, the oxygen is going to agitate. It's going to try to leave the jar. But if you've got those air bubbles down inside the jar, what ends up happening is that they push brine out or liquid out as they try to escape the jar. And so if you've ever canned pickles or like a fruit preserve, like peach halves, you'll often have liquid loss. It's called siphoning in canning. I don't know why, but that's what I mean. Why can't we just call it liquid loss, really? But so every niche has its vocabulary, right? That's one of the canning vocabulary words. So then you end up with jars where you've lost an inch or 2 of liquid. And it's not bad in terms of it's not going to make you sick, but the stuff that's not submerged in the brine or the syrup or whatever canning medium you've put it in, it's going to discolor and lose quality faster. And so by bubbling those jars, you prevent the liquid loss, and so you make a product that's going to last longer on the shelf. Let's talk a little bit about what can go bad or what can go wrong. So with these high acid preserves, and we're boiling, so I'm going to set a timer real quick. With these high acid preserves, you're never going to have botulism, but things can go wrong on occasion. But you're always going to be able to see them or smell them immediately upon opening the jar. So you're never going to accidentally eat something that is bad because you're going to look at it and go, I don't want to eat that. You're going to open a jar and it will have have changed color dramatically, or it will be bubbling, which is an indication of fermentation. It'll smell boozy, and not in a good way. It will be it'll smell bad. Something will be wrong, and you'll look at it and think, this is not right, let me get rid of this. It's not going to be unsafe. It's something you can put in a compost bin or down the garbage disposal or in the trash. It's not a hazard, but it's just something you don't want to eat. And so you make sure that you notice, you pay attention. You don't ever open a jar and start to eat it without looking at it for just a minute. You might have a jam emergency and be like, I need jam right now. Well, just give that jam a once over before you start pouring it into your yogurt or whatever. So another indication that a jar has gone bad is that the seal will go bad. So because what happens is if things ferment or they they start to develop some sort of bacterial or yeast infection or whatever, they that off gases, that process of that microorganism growing off gases, and that off gassing will pressure up against the lid and break the seal. And so that's why, it's like if you ever hear the warning to not eat bulging tin cans from the grocery store, the same thing goes, because in a grocery store, there's no way for that can to break open unless something truly disastrous is happening inside. But for a mason jar, that off-gassing is going to produce enough force to break the seal, and so you're going to know when you open that jar, if the lid comes off too easily, that it's not something you want to eat. That's really it for that kind of safety thing. As far as storage goes, cool, dark place. Keep it out of sunlight. I live, again, high-rise. I don't have a basement. I don't have any sort of natural good place to store preserves. So I have some under my couch and some under my bed. And I have a coat closet that's sort of double depth. And so you spread the coats and it's a wall of pickles and jams. And it works out quite well. But because sunlight is the enemy, it's going to start to discolor your preserves. And as they discolor, they're going to sort of lose flavor and texture. And so you just want to keep it out of sunlight if possible. And that, but
Never in the fridge?
well, once you've done the processing, it's shelf stable, so it doesn't have to be. Like if that's your only good place to store it and you don't have anything else in your refrigerator, sure, go for it. But the nice thing about making jams and stuff like this for me is that, and that's why I can these small batches, is that I have a small refrigerator. And if I put everything I make over the course of the summer and fall in the refrigerator, there's not room for anything else. And my husband doesn't like fruit, and he doesn't really like pickles. And so I know he has many other fine qualities, but he finds our refrigerator a little bit scary on a regular basis. And I'm a food writer, there's a lot of stuff happening in my kitchen. And so if I had a refrigerator that was entirely full of jars, he would never open it. And he wouldn't starve, but he would not eat at home. And so we like to make sure that he can use the refrigerator whenever possible. So that's why but yeah, I mean, if that's your best space for it, then that's fine too.
Once you open the jar, how long is it?
Like a jam with this much sugar, I mean, and this isn't tons and tons of sugar, but this is a ratio of about 2 to 1. This jam is going to last for months open in the refrigerator. If you make something that's really low in sugar, because sugar is a preservative, the less sugar that's in a product, the less time it's going to last. And when it goes bad, it'll start to ferment in the fridge a little bit, it'll get a little fizzy, or it'll start to grow mold. And so, but a month or more, almost always. And pickles last forever. The thing to do is to make sure you're using sort of good jar hygiene. So anytime you go into a jar of jam or chutney or pickles or whatever, use a clean utensil so that you're not introducing any sort of potential bacteria or foreign funk to the jar, so that it stays good longer. Yeah.
How long does something last once it's a jar?
So the USDA always says to use your home preserved food for best quality within a calendar year. But there's no alarm bell that's going off on day 366 or 67. It's just that as things age, they decline in quality. But I have found that with a jam like this, 3 years is by year 3, it's going to start to lose its texture a little bit and be a little bit funny. But I always think of it, I don't give something away that is older than 2 years. But within the first 2 years, it's still going to be delicious. It's still going to be safe. It's going to give someone a good long time. And that's about what they use in terms of commercial production too. Like if you buy something at a grocery store or at a farmer's market, about 2 years is how far out they're putting their best by date. Any other questions? Do you guys want to taste some jam? All right, awesome. So I think Chris went in search of things to put jam on.
Pretzel chips.
Perfect.
They're kind of unflavored, so.
That works. Awesome. So I thank you guys for coming today. This was really fun. I hope you had a good time. This lovely lady in the back has books, and if you want to buy one, I'd be happy to sign it for you. I'll personalize it any way you want, and I will correct the typos, because there are a few. And yeah, so thank you. My name's Marisa. My website is foodandjars.com, and I hope that you all make something. So thanks.